Hi, my name's Helen Trethui, and welcome to Creating a Positive Classroom Climate for Neurodiverse Learners. Yes, a little bit of a mouthful, but nonetheless a very important topic, particularly in this day and age where we are starting to realise that not everyone is the same and not everyone can learn in the same way. And that actually some of these differences can have very positive effects, but they can also make life at school very challenging if the teacher or the people dealing with that child doesn't really understand what is going on. So, in my talk today, I'm going to focus mainly on slow processing and working memory because those are areas that encompass a whole range of neurodiversity. So, whether a student is dyslexic, dyspraxic, maybe they've got ADHD or they're autistic, they may have these difficulties as part of that profile. And also, they can have these difficulties just on their own. But I think they're ones that sometimes teachers don't fully appreciate are genuine difficulties. And if they do, they don't really realize the amount of impact it can actually have. It's kind of like a ripple effect, if you like. So, what are the signs of slow processing? When you know what they are, they're quite easy to spot. But for many teachers, they don't realize that this is slow processing. They often think that a child is maybe being a little bit lazy, or actually they're not that bright. That's why they're being a bit slow, or perhaps they're a bit shy. They often can put other labels on it, which is the other reason why actually I think it's so important that neurodiversity is properly identified and labeled, because if you don't label it correctly, then you end up with a wrong label and then the wrong strategies to help that person. So there are some students, when you ask them a question, they pause before answering, and that can be misinterpreted. People sometimes think, oh, that child's not very clever, or they don't really understand what I was asking, when in fact they could actually understand it perfectly well, but their brain is just taking longer to process it, and that can be a little bit embarrassing, and then that can give anxiety, which then also makes the pause even worse. These are the children who often don't complete their work, or if they do, they haven't really answered things fully. They've written a very short story, even though verbally they might seem quite capable. Um, as they write more and more, there often are organisational errors in their written work. They definitely freeze under pressure. And so things like time tasks can be very stressful and really don't bring out the best in them. And then, interesting enough, over the years, I've worked with a lot of students who've got slow processing. It seems, and I don't know whether this is part of slow processing or just it's a co occurring thing, but a lot of people who have this slow processing also have coordination difficulties, and then some sort of sensory emotional difficulties. And so very often they're slow and then they can seem to overreact to something very small. And it can make these students very misunderstood, in my opinion. So the other area that I really wanted to focus on is working memory, because this encompasses so many of the neurodiverse students that we have. There are so many students actually who have working memory difficulties. And so this can affect so many areas of schooling. So often students who don't, when they write, they don't punctuate correctly. And then teachers can think, oh, it's because they were being a bit lazy or a bit careless, or maybe they don't understand what punctuation is or how sentences work. But it's much simpler than that. It just is simply the fact that when they're reading, they can't keep that information in their head long enough to even work out where the full stop should go. So it's really not to do with not understanding, but it's a genuine difficulty. It can affect reading comprehension because, again, no sooner have they read something than they've forgotten it and they don't remember it. They can often seem a bit distracted. And then again, that's another way that they are misinterpreted, because it seems like they're not trying, rather than the fact they're trying very hard and they just can't keep all that information in their head and they can't process it quickly enough to be able to then work out what's the meaning, what do I have to do. So they might often lose track when they're working through a piece of work. They might miss an important step out. That can then lead to errors, like if you're doing a calculation. And again, it's not necessarily they don't understand the calculation or they don't know how to do it. It's just their brain leaves out a step. They can forget messages and instructions. And that, again, can be frustrating for the teacher because it seems like they're not listening. They're not trying hard enough. And yet, all of these things are actually intrinsic. It isn't lack of effort. And this is where I think if teachers can understand this, they have such power to make the lives very different for students with these difficulties. So that's the areas that I'm thinking about today. So moving on. I've already started to touch on this. There's a lot of kind of misconceptions that go around these difficulties. So, unfortunately, and I'm not quite sure why, a lot of teachers equate brightness with speed. If a child can calculate something really quickly, oh, they must be very bright, or they can write something very quickly and they come up with this lovely story. Whereas, in fact, many deep thinkers and children who actually conceptually understand things actually can be quite slow. So our depth of understanding really has nothing to do with speed. But in maths, we highly value those who can calculate quickly. As I say, teachers often are delighted by the child who can write a story very quickly and it's all very interesting, rather than the child who's taken, a whole lesson to write a paragraph, even though the quality of the work might be the same. People think that hesitation is lack of understanding, and sometimes it's not. It's just your brain is not working that quickly. Um, and then also the slow input, slow output can also be misinterpreted as a lack of effort. And I know for myself, because I do suffer from slow processing. When I was at school, my teachers thought I was just a bit lazy, a little bit careless. It was clear that I was quite bright. And it's a misconception.